So I think I'll probably stand up and do my talk, although it is warmer up here. It's nice and it's good we have the door open. So yes, I am Leonard Paul. I put the J in for Googleability. I don't know where to start. I started in video games in 1994, so when I started I was doing computer programming, so I was at university, you know, like a lot of people here apparently, and so I started out working on NBA Live 95 as a coder. Well, before that I worked in QA, but my first sort of actual working on a game was like a basketball game, and the coding that I did was for Easter egg. So if you lose the finals, you go golfing. So I got to do the little golfing game. So if you type in reflog on the Genesis version, so the Sega Mega Drive version of NBA Live, then you can go to the little screen that I made. It's cute. I got to do physics and a little bit of sound in there, so I can technically say I started in game audio at that point too. So I've worked in games for a while, and I guess what I'll do is I'll also just go through my background on one of the pages too. So these days I run the School of Video Game Audio, and I used to teach at VFS for 5 years. So I was sort of shifted a lot to education and helping others learn more about game audio and interactive audio, and just having lots of fun doing it. And so my Twitter handle is Video Game Audio. All right, and the background there is the SimCell generative music patch that I'll show you a little bit about. So let's see. When thinking about doing this talk, I mean, it's a bit weird because last year at GDC I did this thing called the Game Educators Rant. So basically the idea is that you rant about something, but the funny thing that happened is that you're supposed to kind of rant with the crowd. It's just like, I don't know, PD, it's just crazy source code, ha ha ha, we'd all have a good little chuckle. But the thing is that I sort of went more so it was a funny place to go anyway. So I sort of ranted, but not necessarily with the crowd. So it was kind of they were like, ha ha. So I'm not entirely doing that this talk, but even though it seems like we're all kind of experts here, I do want, my main thing with education is to make just procedural audio a little bit more general. So what I'm going to do is that we're recording it, so that'll be for future prosperity. But then the idea is to spread it to people as well. So it might seem a little bit basic at certain points, but then what I'm also going to do is kind of drill down into my own personal work. And then sort of the meat of it, in a sense, is that at the end of it, then we can just have a Q&A kind of thing, and then I can go through all sorts of details, and then you can ask me all sorts of questions and stuff like that. So I'm just saying that the front end of this might seem a little bit sort of obvious, but I want to give an overview just to sort of give us a starting point. So procedural audio, why would we do this? Well, I find that a lot of us, including myself, I like the academic challenge. So I'm like, okay, there's the sound. How do I represent it mathematically or programmatically? It's a good challenge. It's footsteps or whatever sound it is. How am I going to use, am I going to try and make some sort of, physical model? Am I going to try and do some sort of, granulation? What's the best way of doing this? So the challenge part is a huge sort of draw. So, and also the thing is that these days it seems like it's hip and new, but I sort of started with this stuff some of us here, I've been doing digital audio for a while, and if some of us remember to the mid-90s, there was this huge push for physical modeling. There was the chord prophecy, and it was this thing that was just we went from general MIDI, MIDI saxophone to where you could overblow the saxophone model and it would sound super realistic, right? So this stuff has been going on for a long time, and you could probably trace it back even before that. So right now it's partly maybe even to do with these meetups. I mean, it seems to be a real interest. A lot of the times on GDC or other talks, they'll say the talks that we're interested in are these kind of things. Generative music, procedural audio, they're kind of current topics. And so the thing I really like, being both a musician and a sound designer, is that it produces fresh new sounds. So there's I really like hearing new music. whatever style it happens to be, and I like producing stuff that is sort of challenging and fresh to my ears. So that kind of stuff I find interesting. It's adaptive. If you have a procedural model, you can change the parameters, and then the sound will change. So if you wanted, like, you had a procedural model for a metal bar, you can model it in regular size, or you can make it like 100 meters long, and then make a sound as well. And we've got infinite variations, so that's kind of nice. You don't have to do multi-sampling all the time to get different variations. And you get, like I said, sort of synthy realism, because I still feel like we're kind of at that audio kind of uncanny valley with a lot of stuff. But I do feel like when we combine procedural audio with standard kind of sampled stuff that, like they did in GTA 5 and other games, that we can get a really good sounding scape that's like quite convincing. So it's kind of like in the way that you would compose for television. So you've got your MIDI, back score, and then you've got like, sort of get someone to play clarinet or oboe on top or something, right? And then from a functional standpoint, save space and processing a lot of the time. So this is my history. I started school in 1991. Like I said, did NBA Live. Then I did, in 97, I worked on a granular crowd. So basically, in those days, the PC sound chips were like really, it was hard to find like a base system. You could get like a really good PC sound card, but it was expensive. So to get like, say, a couple megs of RAM for audio was a big deal. So to get the background crowd, we had like a crowd loop that was quite short. But then what I did, because I came from SFU and I worked with Barry Truax, one of his big things is granulation and granular synthesis. So took that and then just like cut it up at a random spot, and then like enveloped in, envelope out, right? But back in those days, we had to do it all by software. So the fact of mixing, a sample with itself actually took a lot of processing power, right? So that's sort of where I got my start, actually functionally using kind of procedural audio-ish type stuff like granulation there. In 2001, I started teaching game audio, so that was at a private college. And then in 2003, I gave my first GBC Talk. And then also I did a PD prototyping article. So yeah, PD is... it's interesting how long it's been going for, and now with Heavy and other like libPD and stuff, it's really sort of taking off. So back in those days, I was talking about, it's a great way to prototype. Now we can actually use it in games. 2006, talked about granulation, and that was kind of like my thing. I came back the next year, greatest hits, tried to come back, repeat album. So I really do like using granulation in games. So this one here, Vessel, which is like an independent title, did well on, for ratings. Didn't necessarily sell that great, but I really like that game. And one of the big things with that is it's a puzzle 2D platformer, and a lot of the gameplay is based on liquid physics. So we spent a lot of time integrating the C++ code with Fmod Designer at the time, but then doing granulation. So I had to pre-segment my grains and chopped up a whole bunch of stuff, but then the programmatic aspect of getting the water to really come alive, like the same way that it was on the screen, and the graphics was like, it was a fun thing to work on. Like, I really like working on the smaller titles. And I also talked about procedural audio in France, so that was sort of an overview talk to people that weren't used to it. And that was a weird talk because when I was talking, I had a transliterator in front of me, so she was actively translating, and like in the French, so I'd be talking and then you have like half a sentence back, you have to hear what you're saying. So whereas in other places, if you've had your talks translated, it's much nicer when they're in a booth and you don't have to. It's not like this weird French woman mirror of yourself. So, and then in 2012, I started the School of Video Game Audio, where I'm teaching Wise, Fmod Studio, Unity 3D, and then Pure Data is a course that starts in March. So this is from my GBC talk and white paper, and I thought it'd be an interesting thing to look back and see sort of where I was thinking about things for the future and where we sort of ended up. And like Pure Data has survived. It's interesting. So yeah, I was saying, oh, wait, maybe we could take some of the code and then, you could actually use that in your game. And that's a little bit of what we're doing in Heavy, right? And then same thing, this is an old shot of Reactor. And those tools are good for prototyping, but they could also be, used in actual consoles. And so that's where we're at now, especially with the Heavy stuff. Awesome. Thanks. So yeah, I'm super stoked about that stuff because I've worked since I started teaching, I've been working with students since 2001. And the first thing I did, because back in those days, that was sort of pre-WISE, sort of middleware like we have these days. So what I did is I built my own game audio middleware in Pure Data. Because at Electronic Arts, they had a tool called AIMS, Audio Event Management System, and I couldn't teach that directly. But then what I did is I sort of built my own version in PD, and then I would teach the students how to use that. So, yeah, it was a lot harder to teach game audio back in those days. Now we've just got middleware. So these are sort of technologies, who's doing it? There's a great talk with Alistair at the last GBC talking about Grand Theft Auto 5. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then I feel like WISE is doing it. They've got sound seed air, so that's basically subtractive synthesis. So, you got a noise waveform, you filter it down, it sounds like wind or whooshes. And then you've got impact, so that's modal synthesis. Has anybody used that? Sound seed impact? It's interesting, huh? It's great for compression, but it just doesn't, I don't know, there doesn't seem to be functionally a lot of reasons that you'll need to take the steady state of a sound and then need to compress it and then play around with it. I mean, you can get a lot of variations, but you can kind of just get that through sampling a lot of the time, and it's just easier. So that's sort of the flip side as well of procedural audio. It's also, I always try and think, why am I doing this? Can I not just use existing tools? And then Rev, that's sort of the that's the engine model they have a whole bunch of. They use granulation, so what they do is they record a RPM like Rev, and then what they do is granulate that and then segment that into RPM bands and then match those up with other recordings, and then so you can basically swap in and out car models like you would sort of sound fonts. So that's how that guy works. Audio Gaming, French company, so they do weather stuff, I guess they do rain and then wind, motor stuff similar to Rev, and then Footsteps. I'm not sure if that's generative stuff or not. I think it's probably from samples. Does anybody know?
Yeah.
It is from samples, yeah. Because the thing that I like about that is because it's sort of automated Foley. So instead of having a Foley walker, you can, not that it's any easier, but you can basically paint in MIDI, in sync with the footage, and then you can say oh, they're wearing high heels or they're on this kind of material. It's kind of it's a quick and dirty way of getting some footstep Foley happening. And then there's Sugi, so that's Nicholas Fernell, Mr. Procedural Audio, so he used to work at Sony. And now he's doing a tool like this, which is super accessible, and I feel like that is a really awesome way of making procedural audio available to people. Because that's really what we want to be doing, is having people use it. And then on the PD side of things, we've got libpd. So I've used it for, just peripherally, tried out the iOS, and then I tried to use it with Android. That was a little bit, didn't quite work. I'll go into more details. And then has anybody used it on Mac or PC or other platforms? Anyone? Yes? Yeah, which platform?
I've used it PC actually.
Yeah.
But also RTC sound.
Yeah.
Through QC sound. It's effectively C sound.
Yeah. So that's with libpd then?
Yeah, I mean, I've used a bit of libpd. I have done a little bit on Android.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of cross over a lot of C sound as well. Separate entities.
Okay, that's what I was curious about, because I've had it seems to be trickier to get it to compile for PC right now. It's just, I don't know. So I was just curious if anybody else had experience with that. And then RJDJ, there's a few RJDJ folks in the house. So yeah, the reason why I love that is because the library's out there. So there's all these standardized, patches that you can use. And then there's Heavy, of course, which is basically getting PD to compile so you can actually use it, right? And there's also others as well. Does anybody have any suggestions on what I could add to this list? Like, I know you're working on stuff, and so for me, this is also a way to learn as well.
Well, like the obvious one would be C.
Mm-hmm.
You know, C++. I mean, that's right.
Yeah.
If you're going to code this, there's a lot of advantages going straight to C.
Yeah, it's true. That's true. Yeah.
It's not hard to make a wise plugin as well. There's some folks in here doing that.
Yeah.
But the wise spec for their plugins is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so then in that case, we would put it under sort of Wise plugin or even Fmod plugins, because I didn't put Fmod Studio specifically, but they have sort of a similar plugin kind of idea. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I mean, why not?
We haven't released it. We've released it something. We've written a VST bridge for Wise. So in theory, you can run any VST.
For PC.
For PC, so you wouldn't use it in game release, like you just wouldn't.
Yes.
Like VST. But if you, in a development cycle, want to try stuff out, you can basically host any VST.
Yeah.
It works.
Yeah, and so that's an interesting point that I want to bring up later as well. Just the idea of handing digital audio between components. Does anybody else use that?
There's many projects in Max too.
In Max, yeah. I guess I'm looking for game audio stuff. Do you know? Because the thing with Max is that it's just difficult to put it into anything that can use the license. So it's enough, you can prototype stuff, but then if you want to release it, might be a little bit tricky.
I guess Faust might go on there.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And Faust has been around for a while.
I don't really know of many situations where it's being used, but there was one game, wasn't there? When he, yeah, it has been used, I think, actually, in a release title.
Yeah. Cool. Well, and I guess that's another reason to bug everybody after as well. So yeah, what do I feel that's missing? Well, I'd like things to be fun. I've been doing this for a while. I like to have a good time. So and that's part of the reason why I teach, is because people that are getting into it, they're having a great time. They're not all like, oh man, frickin' build this and that, and like, compatibility issues and drivers. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, we can get all long in the tooth and stuff. But yeah, like, so with students, you can just go like, oh yeah, procedural audio, it's fun. And it's a challenge though, right? So what I'm sort of most inspired by is I got to see the Grand Theft Auto talk at GBC, and it really, for me, it was pretty cool. It's just like, yeah, those guys they got it figured out. So that's cool. And then also just the accessibility of DSP anime. And then I feel like, yeah, we should get plugins happening for the middle there, what that we already have, like Wise and for Fmod Studio. I think it's really important to reuse things, because the thing is that a lot of us being computer programmers, is that we like to do new things, but the thing is that it's also important to take existing stuff and make it so that it's more accessible and that it's more reusable, and that maintenance phase is not entirely fun, but I think it's also really important because it's sort of like, I find that that's sort of the open source plague, is that people come in and they do all the fun stuff, and then the maintenance stuff to get the drivers working, to make it sync up with the latest hardware. It's not so interesting. So those kind of things, sometimes they fall by the wayside. And to have it say, like, with RJDJ and maybe other ways of doing it, to have a repository of PD patches, or like the reactor library, like the user library. Why not have like a curated library that somebody is actually maintaining, like a human going through there and picking out all the cool stuff and like editing stuff and maybe making things compatible, right? I think that kind of approach is important, because there's a lot out there that's really good that just needs to get sort of dusted off and maintained. And then this is a key point, better design. So it's one thing, like if you want to create your own synth or patch, you can use C++, which is great, but it's also, to me, that feels like, you have a mixing board and then you're like basically like soldering your own channel strip. Like, you can definitely do that, but it's also like figuring out that you don't necessarily need to kind of like look under the hood of the engine. Like, you don't need to necessarily tinker around with that stuff all the time. And Reactor is kind of good for that, because it actually has like a front panel on it, which a lot of people that don't like to get into all those wires and business, they don't, me included actually, when I'm composing, I don't actually want to have to change the patch that much. I like fiddling with the knobs, but I think it's important to have different levels of view so that you can change things so you don't have to monkey with everything all the time. Marketing, so yeah, like Moog, like, synthesizer, great sound, make it, really interesting for people to try out. Or the way that Wise has worked with like middleware, like they've done a good job marketing. So they've got a lot of, market now because of that. And then documentation, like, it's important to make it so that people understand it. That's the thing with PD. A lot of the times a patch gets put out, it's like, oh, it's self-documented. You can see the code. It's like, well, for people that are starting out, yeah, like, it's nice to be able to say, like, this is what the code does. Like, it's nice to have the documentation so that you can just search through stuff and find out, oh, has this been done before? Yes or no? Then I can just reuse it, right? So this is kind of something, like, why not have, like, Native Instruments or, like, Ableton, like, why don't they have, like, a game audio division? Like, it can't be that hard. Like, I know that there's probably a whole bunch of stuff to do with how much return on investment they could actually get, but still, like, it wouldn't be that difficult for them to go, okay, we could actually, like, port our stuff. Because to go to the the Xbox One, and then to the PlayStation 4, and to PC, and to Mac, and also to Steambox, like Linux, it's not really that hard. Not the way that it used to be. Like, I programmed, like, the audio driver for, Need for Speed, Hot Pursuit 2, and I was programming, like, the IOP input-output processor that's, like, basically a PlayStation 1 CPU stuck in the PlayStation 2. And we had to figure out how to get it to synchronize, and, like, I had to code some stuff in assembly, and it's a mess. So when you have that stuff, you spend so much time just doing the manual coding side that you can't actually, like, it's really hard to port, is what I'm saying. Whereas now, the differences between platforms for games is becoming a lot closer. And then, yeah, better AI. And what I mean by AI for control parameters is that you got all this data, constant data coming in from physics. But what I think that we're missing a lot of the times is that we should actually be thinking about, like, a human way that is going to control our instrument, right? So we've got all this, and it has no meaning to it at all the physics stuff. So you want to figure out how to control a visual way of seeing it is like you've got this robot that's the game, and you've got your instrument, like the game audio, that's the guitar, and then you got, this guy's just going all over the place. But you got to figure out, okay, I actually want to, like, make it so that it's got a strum this way, it's actually got a gesture to it. And I feel that a lot of the times that's missing from stuff. So, when I worked on Need for Speed, like, even with the AI cars, if you put the the RPM, like the velocity of the car, direct to the pitch of your, like your loop, you're going to get a whole bunch of hiccups. And even if you've got, like, the gear shifting in there, it's going to sound bad. And then, they were changing the engine model, like the physics engine model, all the time. So we're tuning on our side, the game audio stuff. They're tuning their stuff on the other side. So eventually what happens is the robot's just like, oh yeah, we're just going to put the arm in, like, a few extra centimeters. And then it's just like, it just goes right through what you've done. You're like, oh, come on, really? We had one of our sound guys, he had to go through, and he had spent, like, months basically tuning engine loops. And then they were like, oh, actually, we don't have enough RAM for that. So I had to go back and take another half second out of. But to get it to loop properly and to get it to sound good, we want to try and avoid that kind of stuff. So I think it's important to think that there's a basic AI level between the game physics, the game AI, and then there should be, I think, sort of this other layer before we hit our game audio parameters, like pitch and all the different stuff you can do with PA. And then, yes, what's missing? Optimizations to actually get it running so that it's going to work. And then education, which I think is important, because otherwise, we are a very small group. But the thing is that, synthesizers went from this thing that people were building, or like that you could maybe buy for thousands or hundreds of thousands. And then it sort of eventually trickled down to where everybody uses them now. So that's a trajectory that I see for procedural audio. But it's also exciting to kind of be here kind of at the beginning. But I also think that it's good to let other people know, like, really what cool stuff can happen and what you can do with procedural audio. Should I do demos now or later? Maybe what I'll do is I'll do the demos at the end, and then that way I can just sort of fire through this, and then you can bug me and interrupt me while I'm showing the patch, and we can just sort of dig into that and spend some time with it. So this is the patch that I did for SimCell. It's an educational game. I happened to get like a fairly good budget for it, so then what I did is I kind of just, I don't know, maybe I just wanted to suit the aesthetic of the game, being that it's like you basically play this ship that's been shrunken down to the size of a cell, and then you're sort of moving around the interior part of the cell, like almost like you're in outer space. And so I thought that would be a perfect aesthetic for like an entirely synthetic, sound design and music. So I'll go into more detail quite soon. And then here's the sound effects patch. So it was all done in PD, and the idea was to get it to run in libpd. But then unfortunately, it was an educational game, and so they were going to launch with basically an older version of this Android tablet. And if anybody's worked with Android, like with audio, the latency was absurd. It was entirely absurd. And then like to get it to, this was a couple years back. So to get it to actually the latency to work, and then also the CPU to come down enough so that it wasn't impacting the physics and graphics and everything else, was next to, it was quite difficult. So, and then here, this is, going to be a patch that people can download. So I'll just breeze through this because we already know this stuff, right? Synthesis, you can reduce the file size, you can render stuff up to 190 whatever or more than that, stuff you can't even hear, right? I don't know, maybe that helps some way. And then you can make it flexible and dynamic. You've got filters that you got your hands on. But the main thing is like this idea of like synth design. Like you've got, if you were back in the day, like even starting with like video game audio, you've got people like Hip Tanaka, like he's an engineer, like he actually produced those arcade cabinets. So he would be the one actually doing the circuit design for the game. Whereas now, I don't know how to do that stuff. And so I think that that sort of, that Hip Tanaka era is kind of like where we're sort of at right now. But we're coming out of that, and we're refining it so that it can become accessible for a lot of other people. So synthesis, I can create new sounds. It's always fun, I guess. And then, you can drive parameters from the physics, like I said, indirectly. And sometimes synthesis can actually save you processing power, like they did on GTA 5, where they had noise-based stuff like, say, the aircon isn't that loud in here, but noise-based waveforms, they could actually just synthesize those using subtractive synthesis, and they found that that was a savings over the decompression from, like a data compression that they would use for the audio. So disadvantages, when I see that, I think of pure data, but it's difficult to get a model that sounds good. It's easy to produce synthy, fake stuff. You often add processing power, because you usually kind of need to add effects and other sort of icing to the sound to make it sound like it's actually occurring in a real space. It sounds, vaguely, a sound that you would want to engage with somewhat emotionally. It requires code. It takes a lot of parameters, and that's often, this is where I sort of get confused personally a lot, so that's why it's a current research project of mine, or like, it's a difficult thing for me to attack of how to combine parameters to make it so that they're gestural. Because to me, audio that's synthesized is disembodied, and so it's difficult it's difficult if we, if you really want to have a sound hit, if you want to have weight to a sound, I think it's important to think of inertia, weight, presence of the sound, like a physicality to the sound. And that's something that, from a creative standpoint, that can be difficult to do when doing procedural audio stuff. It requires extra knowledge. So I've already gone over a lot of this stuff. Has anybody not seen this video of the... Yeah? Okay. I do highly recommend it. And I'm seeing you guys at Queen Mary. Is that right? Right on. Cool. So, yeah. But there's a link. I'll make this talk available so you can, download it and stuff. But It's a free talk on the GDC Vault, and it just describes what they're doing with Grand Theft Auto 5. And sort of the takeaways is that they produce this AMP system. It's an acronym for audio something or other. And so it's very similar-ish to sort of a pure data kind of paradigm where you've got functional blocks, cables, right, like reactor. But the thing that's awesome about it is that they made it like quite literally sexy. So they've got like the FFTs and like you can see the audio going from one thing to the next. Like as a sound designer, composer type, you look at that and you're like, oh man, I want to play with that. Like when he showed it, like really people were like, oh man, it's totally like, it's like you're stuck in your crib and you see like, you know, whatever, your older brother having a great time. And you're like, oh, come on. Just, oh. But that's the thing. It's like that's Rockstar North, and like that's their tool set at Rockstar. So I do not have access to it, which, you know, but we can still take away some of the great points that that gives their designers, because they made it fun. They made it a neat thing to actually play with. And so, like I said, yeah, it's good for actually getting a win on CPU. And the thing that was amazing, because I asked him actually like by email, I wanted to confirm, because he said in the talk, he's like, oh yeah, in this gameplay sequence, about a third of the sounds are actually synthesis. And I'm like, no, there's like, because it was like a car chase kind of thing, and then the guy, I don't know, flies out of the car and stuff. But apparently, on average, yeah, like the game is a third synthesis. So those are, you know, actually procedural audio here, which I think is very cool. So yes, I think it's a good thing to see the video. Pure data, most of us know this, is just sort of backstory type stuff. So yeah, it's been around for around 20 years. The thing that I really like is that you can interactively edit stuff. So it's like, to me, it's like an instrument. So when I'm doing a pure data patch, like say that generative music one, I just leave it running and then I tweak it. So it's like you got the car running, and then you can take things out and change it as it's playing. So for me, that's like when I do coding, it's, you know, you play something and then like a minute or so later, then you can hear the result. And I think that that's quite different than playing and having like way less latency. You know, like it becomes an instrument. So for me, pure data is like that. I've been using it a long time. I'm not saying it's the be-all, end-all, but I do teach at a university. I teach second year, and that's a visual arts college. So there's a lot of different people, more so doing visual art. So I teach a course in basically sort of interaction design, which is just kind of like finger painting with pure data. So yeah, they get to do visual stuff, audio stuff. I just give them a whole bunch of like pre-existing patches, and then they just ram them together. So I have people that are like sculptors, people that actually don't like or don't really use computers, you know. And I had this one guy that he was a sculptor, and he was a little bit older, and he's just, you know, the second class, he's just like, yeah, I don't think this is really gonna, it's not my thing. I don't really want to have to use a computer and figure out where all those lines go and what all the boxes do. It's way too much. But I was able to keep him in and interested, and by the end of it, you know, I came into class, and he had his buddies there, and he had made this whole stand thing, like a sculptural piece for the projector to sit on, and then he was showing a sort of virtual world, which it did, you know, it kind of looked like it was out of, you know, sort of a VR kind of aesthetic. So there's like kind of columns and then interesting sort of marble texturing, that kind of stuff. But it was cool. And he had a bunch of his buddies sitting there and like, you know, drinking beer and watching his piece. So for me, that kind of connection is really what, you know, that language can do. It's just makes it accessible. So SimCell, we used libpd to try to combine it with Unity 3D using Kalimba, and there's a paper online by the audio coder that showed sort of how we did it. Unfortunately, like I said, we couldn't use it because it was not just the performance. It was like the latency was silly, because you have, you know, we had the idea is to have high school students. So high school students are not going to be really happy with like a second latency, you know, with audio. It feels weird. And then the performance was probably about it was up at 40% CPU at the beginning, and I was able to basically, by reducing the sampling rate and trying to use some single instruction, multiple data, like optimizations to try to get it better, and was only really able to get it to 20%. We had a lot of physics stuff that we needed to do. So, and then eventually the other guys were just like, yeah, we just need to cam this. So, unfortunately, the patches survived, but they had to be flattened out, so to samples. And so I've got some patches that are available online. FractOSC is a game that uses libpd, and they use it as a native plugin in Unity 3D. And you can, download that and play the game. Heavy, which, I'll speak, I guess, sort of, so please correct me if I'm missing something. So I'm not exactly sure who the team was, but this was who the presentation was done by, right? So is there anybody else that I should add here?
So the company is actually just me and Martin.
Yes.
And we work with Andy.
Yes.
He obviously helps out.
Yeah.
And many people. Christian is also very much helping out, and Rob.
Okay, cool.
So Gav,
Yes.
And probably everybody in this room.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Yeah, so it's a collaborative effort, and yeah, I mean it's awesome to see the code, because trying to beta submitted.
You tried it out?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I haven't gotten it to compile because I got, like I was telling Brent, I basically got the stuff back, and then I'm like, no, I need to stay focused because I was basically coming here in a week. But I do want to pick your brain about getting some wrappers happening.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Because it's the code, it's exciting, but it's also like, okay, now I got to figure out buffery type things.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, cool, awesome, yeah. So yeah, these guys did a talk back in October about this, and I was in LA at the time, talking at the AES there. And when I saw the video, once it was available, so I guess it was actually in November that I saw the video, and I was just like, oh man, yeah. And I talked to Guy Whitmore and a whole bunch of other people about it. I was like, yeah, this is that's the future. I've seen the future. And so Guy Whitmore was super stoked. He was just like, yeah, I totally want to use this for synthesizers for Peggle, or, at PodCap. And, I had some other great reactions to it as well. People that are really interested in sort of, whatever, procedural audio type stuff, or even just PD. They're really, this is what needs to happen. So yeah, real-time parameter controls to control PD parameters. And yes, it is actively being worked on, which is great. Okay, so libpd, small overview. It's free. We've got patches available, through the community. Martin Brinkman, I used a lot of his stuff. RJDJ. Quick to prototype. You can, if you want, you can even create your own objects in C and probably other languages. I don't know. I've only really tried it in C. And then it's portable across different platforms. And there's code available for Unity 3D integration, which is quite nice. It just makes it a lot easier to, say, have PD, emanating from a 3D sound space in Unity. Disadvantages, poor performance, so that's what Heavy's basically chewing through. The thing that I needed to deal with is that when I was taking patches, a lot of them were PD extended, so then I needed to basically translate. It's sort of, no, not really. It's a little bit like trying to go from C++ back to C in a certain way, like where you've got say a library that it's using, but you don't have access to it, right? So to get it to PD vanilla, it took a bit of time. And sometimes if there's an object or a function that you want to do, but it's not quite available, you got to recode the whole thing. So you got to either do it in C or build it from PD chunk little bits and pieces. Visual Spaghetti, it's very easy. It's hard to make a nice looking patch in PD, as I'll show you. There's no tech support, and it's still an emerging technology, so it's kind of like you're hoping for the best when you're working with libpd. But it is being worked on off and on, so for people that wanted to try this out, this is sort of just you try it out on iOS. Basically just get Xcode, go to GitHub, compile, and there you go. And then it just makes sound on the little thing here. You move around here, and it changes the FM parameters, and you can hit it, and makes a different sound. There's the output, and there's the PD guts, right? And the actual text part of the PD patch, and yeah, it just works. So it's easy for people to get their sort of feet wet. And this is more for people that like sound designers or composers that are like, well, PD's all fine and dandy, but it's no reactor. Well, yes, it isn't. But if you wanted to, you can port like Martin Brinkman did. He made that patch in reactor, but then he also made it in PD. So as far as the power, PD is quite powerful. I also do like art pieces, and I have a piece. I come from Vancouver, BC, and so there's this sort of suburb called Surrey, and there's the Surrey Art Gallery, and we've had a piece with Pure Data talking via OSC to Flash to do the visuals, and it's got 2 cameras that do motion detection, and so there's an adapted music piece that was done by some local composer. So we had basically all the content was done by high school students, and so it's called Surrey Remix, and yeah, I guess we can open the door again. It's just that there's it's getting a little loud, but I think we're good. So yeah, it's been running for about, I think it ran for 7 years in total. So basically it was just burning out hardware. And now they got to a point where it was difficult for them to find hardware that would work, like, because they're gallery people. So it was hard for them to find a version of like the hardware that would run Windows that would run Flash. So Flash was the weak point there. Because, it's proprietary, and then the thing is that trying to upgrade that, we didn't have access to the source code. So anyways, anytime people are like, oh, PD doesn't really work, or it's actually good. Like if you get stuff running, it can be super robust. So yeah, and it's also very general as well. So why not have like, Max for Live, but like for Wise? Why not just have it like, there you go, there's like libpd running like inside of Wise. We could do that, or they could do that. It'd probably be pretty slow. But you could do that interactively, and then you could press export, right? You'd have a heavy thing running in there. Have it running live with the game like you can do with Wise or like with Fmod, right? And then, like I said, you can get it to compile for performance. You could have it where, Audio Kinetic or whoever it is actually has like, I think it's important to have like either a human or have some sort of community that is actively maintaining the patch library. I think that's important because if nobody's really doing it, then it's a hard thing to design and maintain things. And it's not that much fun to maintain things, so I think it's something that needs to it's a job that needs to get done, but it's hard to find people to do it for free. So a community manager is a good idea, I think. And education tutorials, right? Like when I'm teaching people Wise, their manual is like, 900 pages now? And then they have a whole bunch of tutorials, like, YouTube videos. It's great because I can just go like, yeah, here's the program, here's the tutorials, there's the manual, and then if you're stuck, just let me know. And then I get people past issues. And so I think that, having tutorials that are maintained and up to date is a great way to bring more people in, and then that just makes things escalate from there. Make it fun and easy to play with, and same thing, I talked about before, like why not have Ableton where you can just, like there was this whole thing, what was it, X-MIDI, what was it called? It's like MIDI 2.0, or XMF. It was like the extended MIDI file format. And the idea was to make a sort of interactive file format. This was by Linda Law and sort of George Sanger. Does anybody know of this? Not really?
I saw it.
Yeah, okay.
I saw its existence, but
Yeah.
actually know anything more about it.
Exactly, because it was kind of like a spec that they developed and then it sort of just went, And I think that's sort of unfortunate. I think we could definitely probably pick stuff up from there, and then maybe there'd be a way of maybe it's a bad example to use OMF for video. What's a good, I don't know, whatever, like an interchange file format where you lose some stuff, but then at least you can get it into another program. Like say, I don't know, like OpenOffice works with, Microsoft files or whatever. You have some sort of format that's sort of the lingua franca that you use, and you might lose some details out of that, but then you could import this, and then you could have, instead of your synthesizers being Reactor and stuff, you could have those as routing to PD or something like that. these are things that are possible, you know. I don't know if they're necessarily economically viable, but anyways. So back to me, you know, what do I want to do in procedural audio? Well, I want to teach people how to use it. You know, I think it's important to give people an idea of what is possible out there, and then just see what happens. I want to use it in future game and film projects. So even on the film that I'm using, I'm wanting to do like this XStar MFA. It's like this language that's being developed. It's sort of real-time coding language that's being developed in Australia. Anybody know about this? Nobody? Oh no, really? It's quite impressive. It's you should look it up. So I had no idea about it. Then I saw a couple of videos from the main guy, and it's quite amazing, because basically, like what I was talking about, we're being able to visualize the implementation from different levels. They've got two different languages running at the same time, so they've got kind of this scheme-ish kind of thing. But then they've also got another one that's similar, but runs all the heavy lifting, DSP stuff. And they sort of look the same, but they're not the same. So one is for controlling kind of the DSP functions. And so, but the two actually can work with each other. I'm not explaining it very well, but the idea is that you've got this top layer that you can play around with and do live coding with, and it's very, it's very powerful, because you can drill all the way down so that you can actually screw and change the buffer lengths or anything. It's quite amazing, and it runs.
It's evolved from impromptu.
Okay.
Yeah, impromptu. Yeah. So yeah, it's the latest and greatest, and then it also does graphics as well. So to me, that is a neat area of research, but I have to be careful as well, because it's sort of a deep rabbit holes that I got to be careful of. And so yeah, I want to continue researching and enjoying myself. So thoughts. These are just some things I'm throwing out there. You know, integration, like I said, of libpd, put it into Wise or Fmod. The heavy compiler, you know, if you get it licensed within an existing middleware, or, you know, get it to compile Wise plugins. Native Instruments, you know, they could open up their game audio division. Same thing for Ableton. AMP, well, it'd be nice if we could get that, yeah? Because it's already done. Come on, just give us a piece. And then, yeah, like, should we be learning, like, about digital audio or procedural audio, like, in schools, public schools? So, like, with the university, like, it's this, I have students that are, like, 19 years old, like, learning about pure data. And it's not really that hard. Like, kids, whatever, people, you know, whoever it is, if you have an access point, people are very smart, and then they'll figure out how to play with it. So I like to call it digital finger painting, because if I say coding, it freaks people out, kind of, because it's just sort of like, I'm going to break it. And it's just like, no, finger painting, you're not going to break anything. Like, just go for it. If we need to reboot, if you make a little, you know, feedback loop in there, then, you know, I'll fix it, kind of thing. So that's where I come at it. I'm just like, yeah, try anything out, and we'll figure it out. And then, I mean, this is a little bit cheeky, but, you know, the idea of having it become more mainstream. Like, it is interesting that Wise has had, like, SoundSeed Impact for so long, but, like, not a lot of people use it. So I think it's not only just the design, but then it's also the marketing, too. And then also, so it's sort of evangelizing it, but then also making it so that you have examples that you can say, like, oh, okay, that's why I would use it. And I think that's the major shift from being like the way I think often about things, is I'm just like, oh, that would be cool if I could make that. Versus with students, a lot of the time it's just like, why? Why would I do that? And if there's no reason to use it, then people kind of go like, okay, well, you know, then I'll just use samples. I know how to use samples. I don't want to have to learn this whole extra thing, right? But if there's stuff that you can do in pure data and with procedural audio that you can't really do, like, you know, sort of the way that they worked with Grand Theft Auto, then why not do that? So yeah, why not add to the sort of marketing and design of procedural audio so that it sort of spreads out there. So I think a user experience is really important, just to make it accessible. You know, make it a fun instrument to play. like the tools I've talked about, designed for reuse, have a patch library, document that, reduce the complexity, and then, this cross-platform standard. So if you're wrapping stuff in VSTs, like getting digital audio to sort of talk between functional things on different systems, right? I don't know if port audio is another way to go. What do people think? No, because you can't, because you can't really do it through OSC. It's more meant for control rate data, right? Okay, well, this is another open topic now. I'm just throwing stuff out there, and then you can hammer me with why I can't do it or why we can't do it later. And then, why not make it seamless with middleware? The middleware is already out there, and we've seen the shift between when there was no middleware and where everybody had their proprietary stuff to where we are now, where there's, I don't know how many people they have working both at Audio Kinetic and at FMOD, or Firelight, but I mean that's where we have that kind of resource now that we didn't have before. We don't have to do everything from scratch. So, but sometimes doing stuff from scratch is fun. So, questions, and then I'll do my demo later. We'll do the demo later. All right. So questions.